The Rolling Stones are going to be the marathon on August 15th. I am going to be bringing you 18 hours right here on WBWC, and I'm really excited for it. We're going to play a lot of exclusive tracks. We're going to play some stuff from Mick and Keith's solo careers, and we're going to play a lot of live editions of songs, too, and we're going to talk a little bit about the live show. I'm getting a few experts, I guess I should say, to discuss what happened, because I didn't get to attend the concert, but I know, I have a bunch of friends who did get to go, so I can't wait to talk some Stones with them. Olivia McGreevy is going to join us here in just a second to talk about the concert as well. But the big thing for me with the Rolling Stones is not just them coming to town for the first time in 22 years. This is a legendary rock and roll group.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Legendary. One of the best to ever do it. We talked about the Beatles Rolling Stones comparison because the Beatles is going to be the week before, and I think that's just perfect for this year's edition of the Marathon Series. I mean, kind of a bummer we didn't get to start the Marathon Series early.
If the Who would follow the Stones.
If the Who follow the Stones, there you go. That's we have our triple threat of oldies alternative on Sundays, but that would be your triple threat on the Marathon Series.
The British invasion, yeah.
The triple threat of the British invasion, indeed, that would be. But it's just going to be Beatles and Rolling Stones back-to-back. That'll be August 15th here on The Sting. Hosted by me and Tom LaMoreaux. He's going to bring his twist a little bit as well, as he will host some hours of the Rolling Stones Marathon. What are you going to bring to the Rolling Stones Marathon this year that the listeners could be excited about?
I don't know. I think I'm most impressed about the Rolling Stones, how they, it's been so many years, okay? Mm-hmm. You talk about groups that have been around 20 years. Ryan Radke was talking about, the evolution, of the group in his marathon. And, but the Rolling Stones, their sound has changed for whatever, was the current sound through the 80s or whatever they did, and not a lot of groups can do that. You kind of get, as you keep going, you kind of get stuck in what you're doing, you know, but they were able to continue on, stay together. Not many groups can stay together that long. A group like the Four Tops stayed together a long time, but they were doing the same kind of thing, and it was good, But for their music to evolve and change, that really was impressive with the Rolling Stones over the years.
Absolutely, very impressive. The thing, I watched the Rolling Stones documentary not too long ago, and the big thing that really stuck out to me that I really didn't think about until it was mentioned was the Rolling Stones continued while the Beatles didn't.
Right.
If you talk about the British invasion bands that were just so massively successful in the 1960s, and only a year apart really before their number one singles. 1964, the Beatles had their array of number one singles, and then the Rolling Stones had I Can't Get No Satisfaction in 1965, and that really just rolled the stone, I guess I should say, for the group afterwards. And when you talk about legendary band members like Brian Jones, who they said named the band and created that whole legacy that made the Rolling Stones what they are to this day. It's unreal what the band has done over the years, and to stay together all this time. Mick and Keith are the only two original members left in the group, obviously with the sad passing of Charlie Watts not too many years ago. But it is just insane. And Ronnie Wood's been with the group a long time too, so I don't want to just leave him to the side. But
the Beatles had such a overwhelming, presence from the fans and from media, and
just look at when they first came to the States.
I don't think that could have continued for that long. So much pressure on all of them individually. It's kind of like the pressure Elvis had. Just everybody, everywhere, just crushing. On them, and that's how the Beatles were. And kind of like maybe Taylor Swift is experiencing that now. Everything she does, everywhere. Everything's highlighted everywhere in the media, everything, and that's got to be a lot of pressure. And I think that's probably why I think the Stones, while they're tremendously successful, bands like the Who, they didn't have that kind of pressure on them.
But I think the thing to think about too is when you look at like the Beatles, all four members, you look at them as a collection, and you see they had all those hits from those 10 years together, from 1960 to 1970. Then the band broke up. Everyone went their separate ways. But then you see the music that John did with Yoko Ono. Then you see what Paul McCartney would go on to do with his wife, Linda, and Wings. You would see what George Harrison's career would turn into. And Ringo Starr, much success after the Beatles as well. All four of them made some sort of significant impact after they broke up. You look at the Rolling Stones, not only did they really stay together all this time, the solo careers of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards really didn't blast off the way that you look at. Like Paul, you could probably say, is the most successful solo career of all four of the Beatles. Paul McCartney is just hours and hours and hours of material. You probably can't even fill an 18-hour marathon.
Maybe not, yeah.
That's why I give John all the credit in the world, because he's been doing that marathon for a while. You probably can't even get to 25% of the songs
right,
that you include with the Beatles and what they did individually.
Well, Paul McCartney's writing, it just has more of a wider appeal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's more on like a pop song, ballads, you know. And at one time, John Lennon was critical of that.
Yeah.
But see, that John Lennon was a little more avant-garde, you know, and to Paul's. But that's what made it work, because together they found the perfect balance of both of those ideals.
And you know, to speak of the Lennon-McCartney partnership, what's probably second to that? Jagger Richards.
Or Elton John and Taupin.
That's another good combination there.
I think that rivals Lennon and McCartney.
You think it rivals it? I think that's top, but yeah. I would say Jagger Richards, though, is probably second.
I would still put, you know, Lennon and McCartney, obviously, you know.
Yeah.
And Jagger and Richard, but, you know, that's quite an impressive relationship, and the work and the music from Elton John and Bernie Taupin as well.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. But as I said, just looking at the Rolling Stones, the whole history of the band is so long, so deep. And you think about this, too. The Beatles, when they broke up, yeah, all four of them had their number one hits and their top tens individually. The Rolling Stones into the 70s still were hitting number one hits. You had Miss You, you had Brown Sugar, you had Angie was a number one hit. Start Me Up was very close.
And Miss You, see, those songs were starting to get into a little bit of a disco sound.
Yeah.
They were evolving into the sound, you know, that was successful at the time. You know, there's a lot of groups that put like Kiss did one song that was like disco in sound. Pink Floyd, every brick in the wall is that's a disco flavor, okay? And but the Stones did several songs, and you know, then even in the '80s, their sound.
Start Me Up in '81 sounded very similar to, I'd say, a lot of the early rock that we saw from like Poison and maybe not as hard, but like from Poison and Guns N' Roses and Bon Jovi, those groups. It had like that hard guitar riff right at the open of the song. So Emotional Rescue was another 80s hit that was disco style.
Up new fans. They continued to pick up new fans. You know, they just weren't relying on the fans they had. You know, they kept those fans and then picking up. You know, there are probably a lot of people in the 80s that might have listened to Stones for the first time, might have thought they were a new group.
Yeah, I would agree.
They didn't know a lot about their music.
You have to look at the entire history of the group to realize. I mean, I know a lot of people would say the 1960s was prime Rolling Stones, and I would agree with that, but they had so much success in the 70s and even into the 80s. I mean, look at Mixed Emotions in '89 when that came out. That was almost like a post-grunge kind of sound, well, early grunge-ish sound. I mean, they really adapted with the times, and you just talk about the fact that Mick and Keith in particular have stayed together all these years. Along with, you know, the band members have changed around. Obviously, Brian Jones, sadly, no longer with us. Charlie Watts, now, sadly, no longer with us. Legends in the industry. Ronnie Wood, when he joined the group. It's just unbelievable, the amount of history that has gone into the Rolling Stones. And my opinion, I would probably say second to the Beatles in terms of the name. Like, when you say Rolling Stones, I think anyone at my age, I'm 23 years old, their prime was way before I was born. But I know all their songs by heart. I could go to a Rolling Stone show today and just put my fist in the air and jam out to everything they play.
Every single one,
even their newest releases. Just Mick is an absolutely great showman from everything I've saw. Keith Richards, same thing, and that they're still doing this at age 80 plus. 80 plus.
Yep.
I'm just stunned by the history of the group, and I have never been more excited. I've taken a year off marathons here at the Sting, but I have never been more excited, I think, to do a marathon than I am the Rolling Stones. It's just one of my favorite groups, and the legend and the history behind the group compared to...
Absolutely.
I mean, I got to help John with the Beatles a few years ago, but this one to me is going to be really special. I wish, as I said, we could have done it a little bit closer to when they were in town, but you know what? I think the listeners are going to enjoy it the same. But I do know someone who was in town for the Rolling Stones marathon, and she, not the Rolling Stones marathon, but the Rolling Stones concert. She is going to speak here in just a second. Tom is actually going to get out the door, though. Tom,
I appreciate it.
Really appreciate it as always. Thank you so much for joining Extra Innings with Andrew Hoty. Absolutely.
Forward to the marathon.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it, too. Tom LaMoreaux will be joining me on the marathon on August 15th for the Rolling Stones. We have a song to preview the marathon here in just a couple minutes, but Olivia McGreevy is going to talk to us about the Stones concert and what she got to see.